Hello boys and girls, Adam Nicholas here for WhatCulture Wrestling, and today we've got a bit of a blast from the past, plucked from the depths of the WWE vault. You see, recently they released a gallery on WWE.com, the link for which you can find in the bio below, and it basically consisted of a whole bunch of ideas and costume concepts for a whole bunch of different wrestlers. Now, if you're a bit of a wrestling attire nerd like I am, then you're probably going to want to check that gallery out in full, because there's loads of ideas on there, a massive collection, some of which are absolutely amazing, some of which are like, holy shit, what were you thinking? That would have been a terrible idea, with pretty much no middle ground whatsoever. But because you're all very busy people and I just so happen to be a very swell guy, I decided to do you a favour. So myself and WhatCulture.com's Michael Hamflet have been through the gallery and cherry-picked some of the absolute best and some of the absolute worst to save you the trouble. I'm Adam Nicholas, this is WhatCulture Wrestling, and these are 10 original WWE character concepts you won't believe. Number 10, Max Moon. So, this gimmick, apparently, was supposed to rocket strap Mexican sensation Charles Conan Ashnoff all the way to the top of WWE upon his arrival. The concept stemmed from Conan's own design that he pitched to WWE Creative at the time, which, as you can see, on paper actually looks kinda good. Sadly, this was one of those situations where things got lost in translation, and I'm not talking Bob Harris. And while this may have seemed like an interesting concept on paper, in practice, not so much. When you look at how this eventually turned out, it's easy to see why Max Moon is such a legendarily bad character. You see, what you've got here is a classic case of expectation versus reality. Expectation, this could be a really cool, futuristic looking cyborg badass who's going to take the ring by storm. Reality of the situation here is that he looks like the title sequence from Saved by the Bell, and he's basically a grown man covered in foam noodles. Number 9, Scott Hall. When Scott Hall pitched his Razor Ramon character to Vince McMahon during their initial meetings, he borrowed liberally from Brian De Palma's 1983 film Scarface. Now, obviously, Vince McMahon isn't exactly a film buff, but the notion wasn't lost on him. It was a notion that actually carried all the way through to the early ideas for the gimmick that would eventually make Scott Hall a star. While the final product for the Razor Ramon character would end up some distance from the early sketches, the long tights did actually make a solitary appearance before Hall abandoned them in favour of trunks by the time he made it to WWE television. Number 8, IRS. Vince McMahon presumably felt he had his finger on the pulse of a nation when he took his tax-based frustrations out in the form of the Erwin R. Shyster character, but it's fair to say that perhaps the original designs weren't exactly suited, shall we say, for the man who would eventually take up the role. Despite Vince trying to have his cake and eat it, combining a taxman shirt with a sports entertainer's tights, the first drafts didn't quite fit the bill, nor Mike Rotunda for that matter. So the slim fit style was abandoned and replaced by the iconic trousers and shirt combo that would become synonymous with the Shyster character. Number 7, Mankind. In his first autobiography, Mick Foley documented the early conversations he had with WWE Creative after leaving ECW in 1996 to head up north. Foley notes that the Mankind moniker was one of his own in response to a Mason the Mutilator suggestion by WWE Creative. Just take a minute there. Mason the Mutilator. I don't think so. Basically, imagine if he'd been called that after having spent so much time building up such a stellar reputation as Cactus Jack. Well, it all would have just gone down in flames, wouldn't it? Bang, bang. The initial drafts for Mason and Headcase were at least visually closer to how the eventual gimmick looked, although the company's penchant for pantomime needed to be scaled back just a little bit before Mankind would debut as The Undertaker's newest foe in 1996. Number 6, Repo Man. Now, the Repo Man was a great example of WWE's aforementioned penchant for pantomime, dripping in goofiness from head to toe, ridiculous from the moment he first scampered out to the ring in 1991. The look of Lone Ranger light that Repo sported was a long way away from some of the original drawings, with the character initially being portrayed as more of a dystopian future Robin Hood than the sneaky scoundrel he ended up depicting on TV. As you can see, this version of the Repo Man would have been more at home in a Mad Max film than in a wrestling ring. But to be fair, Repo's eventual attire does feel more suited to WWE's product at that time. Number 5, Diesel. Having built his brand around being this cool, nonchalant, rule-breaking badass, Kevin Nash knew his days as being a credible WWE champion were numbered when they decided to put him on their in-house magazine, and he was basically pictured with a massive big smile, cuddling the title like a little child with a teddy bear. But as this rare glimpse into Nash's out-of-ring wardrobe would suggest, WWE creative at least had some idea of how to establish Diesel as a star outside of leaning on his physical dominance. Admittedly, taking the Joker's colour scheme and a winged eagle t-shirt that literally came right out of the merch catalogue might not have been the best bet, and it's probably quite a good thing that this particular ensemble never left the page. While company guy Diesel wore suits well in his corporate engagements for WWE, this look would have brought him closer to his clown colleagues than the cool hand look that he'd spent his time cultivating. Number 4. Gold Dust. Dustin Runnels infamously didn't know what the word androgynous meant when Vince McMahon first picked up the phone to ask if he fancied playing the character of Goldust. But to be fair, if he'd seen some of these original drawings, he probably would have had no issue whatsoever, because they are absolutely delicious. Goldust went through a multitude of changes in the developmental stage, but this sharp, suited and short-haired original was a far cry from the sexually charged, walking mood board that finally debuted in the autumn of 1995. His cinematic vignettes may have had him donning a golden jacket, but he was still nowhere near as stylish as these original drawings might have suggested. Number 3. Bret Hart. Now, I think we can all agree that Bret Hart wouldn't have been the best there is, best there was, and best there ever will be if he'd kicked off his singles run looking like the worst night of his career had thrown up all over him. We can only assume that this was an imagination fart from the same part of Vince's brain that devised WWE Crown Jewel. Equally terrible, and with a similar green, purple and gold colour scheme to boot, this look wouldn't have been a patch on the iconic pink and black ensemble that would come to define the Hitman's career. Number 2. Doink the Clown. It's probably fair to say that Doink the Clown was a little bit of a scapegoat when it came to WWE's general shitness in the mid-90s. However, if you look at these initial drawings and the original concept ideas for the character, it's fair to say it's a bit more sinister than perhaps the character we ended up seeing on WWE television. The hauntingly shaved head, yet still somehow green, is a devilish little touch, with the madcap colour scheme substantially more sinister than the end product that we saw on WWE TV. Now, a clown gimmick was potentially always destined to fail, let's be honest, but the murderous intent of the original idea may have just been the it factor that Doink's character was missing. And number 1, The Rock. It didn't matter how many times Jim Ross called Rocky Maivia a blue chipper during his Survivor Series entrance, the fans just were not smelling what The Rock was cooking, and it's fair to say Rocky Maivia's character was dead on arrival. The blue and white colour scheme may have gone hand in hand with JR's commentary, but it did little to distract from an otherwise horrendous gimmick. But would it have helped if the third generation star had been decked out in red instead? Probably not, to be fair, but as you can see from these early sketches, that was very much an option considered by WWE creative. Fair to say nobody was expecting the Great One to emerge from the bones of such a woeful gimmick, and while neither blue or red would have been enough to prevent Die Rocky Die chants, the pure electricity of The Rock was more than enough to dust them off, turn them sideways, and stick them straight up your candy ass.
Austin versus Bret Hart, take 4. That's the point. Tower of Doom, take 6.
It's a frying pan!
Ow! Rock versus Mankind, take 2.
Ow!
Kenny Omega versus the Inflatable Doll, take 12. Finger Poke of Doom, take 3. TLC 2, take 8.
Oh, really? It's a bit high.
Omega versus Okada, take 6.
It's like 7. It's like 7, you know? It's like 7. It's like 7 stuff.
Royal Rumble 2014, take 1. Royal Rumble 2015, take 1. Bayley versus Sasha, take 18. The Anus Explosion Deathmatch, take 26.
Wait a minute, wait. Just one more time, just so I'm clear. You want this sans anus?
We'll just do a book.
Yes, that was never going to work, was it? So instead, myself and the rest of the great men of WhatCulture Wrestling have written this: 505 wrestling matches to see before you die, which you're absolutely going to. By the way, it is the ultimate guide to the extraordinary history of in-ring competition. Stretching back as far as the 1950s and featuring hundreds of wrestlers from promotions across North America, South America, Asia, Europe, this is a frankly gargantuan undertaking that we reckon is a must-have for wrestling fans of any any generation. It's available now in ebook format from Amazon for the absurdly generous price of £4.99, but we are also doing a limited run of this frankly gorgeous print version. 320 pages, extremely detailed on the best wrestling that ever took place for less than the cost of a jumper. Shop.WhatCulture right now because we love you.
It's a dilapidated coat.